Twitter than my books. It's like, I mean,
superstar.
I don't get paid for tweeting, you know what I mean?
You should.
I agree.
You should work that out. Hi, everybody.
What's going on, people?
Yeah.
This is the after 7 crowd. Is it after 7 yet? This is the after 6:30 crowd.
Yeah. Come nap taking, we won't call you out.
Long day at work crowd.
Yes.
Well, we don't know how this is about to go, but fortunately for you all, we know each other very well, and it'll be a lot of fun.
We figured we would just continue to talk the same trash we always talk, but into microphones. That seems like a good plan.
Exactly.
I wanted to start out. The first time I ever met Jason in person, because we knew each other online for a while, and I had, of course, heard about his ass. And I was walking down
about actually. It's all over the internet.
Ass is moving out. Come on. In the YA community. Anyway, I was walking down the street in Bed-Stuy, where at the time we both lived, and I got a tweet that was from Jason. He was like, yo, I think I just saw DJ Oda walk past. And I stopped in my tracks, because I've been trying to meet this motherfucker the whole time, you know what I mean? And so I literally stopped where I was. By the way, this is a YA event. There's no kids here. There's a baby. There's a bitch. That's my niece. She's used to it. So, yeah. The kids at YA table is not kids at YA. I looked over and I was like, oh, there are kids here? Oh, but you guys are beautiful. Thank you for having us. Anyway, stopped in my tracks, went back, and I was like, oh, you must have been in that coffee shop you always writing in. Like, writing-ass writer. Because Jason is a writing-ass writer. And I say that with like, the most. I always thought I was a writing-ass writer, but it turns out that I'm not, because Jason exists in the world. I'm a writing-ass writer. So, and he was in that coffee shop every single day until he moved here, and now he's in this coffee shop every single day. So I kind of want to just be like, how do you do it? But that's corny. So, what is your process, my brother?
Process. It's funny. So we were talking earlier. First, I appreciate the question about process. The interesting thing about me right now is that whenever I'm at a festival or a conference, I'm sort of slated to sit on diversity panels.
You want to talk about diversity?
I actually don't want to talk about diversity. I'm always slated to sit on diversity panels, and no one ever wants to talk to me about process, and I take offense to it, and I get all like funky, and I'm like, I don't understand I work so hard. And they're like, hey, we want you to come to this conference so you can sit on this diversity panel and represent all the black people in the industry and everybody else in the world. And it's like, yeah, but I'm also a writer who values himself, or who values literature, values the craft, and I work very hard. I mean, I've been in the industry for 13 years. Right? Everyone's like, oh, this is new kid, just showed up out of nowhere. It's like, no, I've been in for 13 years trying to get better and trying to be here. And so I appreciate that. But in terms of craft, it's so interesting. Because I don't know if I'm sure it's different, but I don't know if it's that different. I mean, first and foremost, I work every day, right? Like at the end of the day, I think I'm effortful and intentional about that every single day. But I always start with characters. I'm one of these people who sort of, it's a quote, it was like every novelist is a little bit schizophrenic. And these are characters who live in my head. These are people that I know in real life that I sort of transmute and change and figure out ways to make them either more interesting on the page or a little less interesting than they actually are in real life. And they sort of sit in my psyche. I mean, they've been there for forever. And I hear them and we relate, we commune. And so it's time for me to put them on the page. But I have this theory, right? And so my theory is that what makes a great book, specifically when it comes to the relationship between character and context, right? Character and environment, which is, if anyone's read any of my books, you know that they're all just about the way that young people are relating to their environment, right? So a lot of books are about Brooklyn, and Brooklyn itself is sort of like, the secondary character, right? My theory is that every single character has to also be a setting, and every single setting has to be a character, right? Now, so like my theory, or the way I feel about it is that, when you think about setting, you're thinking about sort of movement, right? What's happening in an environment. We were talking about the setting right here. It would be like, all right, there are how many people in this space, what are they eating, how are they feeling, how are they connecting to one another? When I'm writing characters, it's the same thing. How many people exist within this character? What are they thinking? How are they feeling? And how are all those people relating to each other within the body of the character, right? There has to be a character and a person, and a setting.
Right.
And the same with the actual environment, right? The environment has to take on all the characteristics of a person.
Right.
Right? So we're talking about a person, we're talking about more of a singular view of like thought, feeling, things like that. And every environment has to be breathing, has to be speaking, has to be communicating, has to be feeling something. The environment itself has to have a pulse. And so so that's the way that I sort of construct the story. I think of I build both of those things, and I think about how they connect and relate to one another. And then I just kind of like freewheel it until I find my way.
You and I are one. That's exactly. Like I think a lot about the threshold that you kind of tip over when you know a book is going to be a book. And until that point, there's that period where you're just kind of wandering through the haze trying to figure out, okay, is that the character? And then the character might click, but then like, what world are they in? And once the world and the character are good, I'm good. And I'm the same way. I don't outline. I call it the catapult method because I'll just put myself in the catapult and cut the cord and like shoot out across. I try to there's a castle over there and a mountain over there. Might aim for the mountain, but I don't know where I'm going to end up.
Right.
And that's, to me, that's the joy of the process.
Right.
Is finding out. And these Virgos usually who outline all the time.
Are you ever?
No, I'm a Capricorn. That's what I'm saying. Like I don't understand these
But
people.
y'all sit in that funny sweet spot where it's like y'all want to be adventurous, but y'all also mad, methodic. Like,
We both right? No, that's exactly right.
yeah.
We are both methodical and adventurous.
it's almost like you could turn. Right now we're about to get into like the stars.
Now look, I know I didn't want to go there, but it's just because the only Virgo writers I know will write a paragraph in their outline and then go back and edit that paragraph. No, like they'll have it outlined out and then they'll write a section and then they'll go back and edit that section. To me, that is the definition of insanity because I need to push forward in my process and flow is everything. If I stop and go and edit something, everything is fucked.
I think that if it's boring for me, it's boring for you.
Right, exactly.
If I don't have a good time writing a book or like figuring it out, then you won't have a good time figuring it out either.
Right.
Because it's going to come across on the page.
But to your point about context and character, that's so deep because that's stuff that I really like. I lecture on and think about all the time, and I also have a whole theory on it. And it's what you said, and I love thinking about context, both as character but also as conflict. Which we will be told over and over in every writing class, conflict is the the backbone of story or the symphony of story and everything else, and it is. But I feel like we sleep on context as conflict. And that's so starkly true when you live in Brooklyn, or I think when you live in any American city, how, and I love that you said movement is one of the main things that you look at, but I feel like we often sleep on the true crisis of setting. Because setting becomes something very stagnant, especially when you call it setting. That reminds me of like English school, like English class, where it's like, yes, I think it is place plus time.
Right.
Like, no, man, there's all kinds of shit happening in the middle of setting, you know what I mean? Like, and that's why things like gentrification are so important. Things like, the police violence that happens, the way that a street changes. When I was writing Shadow Shaper, I had to constantly update it because the streets were changing so fast. And I was trying to write description and I couldn't keep up with gentrification. It was that real. So how am I as a writer who is bound to tell the truth? That's my duty as a writer, right? Not gonna look at that truth that's happening in the city that I live in and that I'm writing about. So I really, value the concept of context as crisis.
So let me ask you this, since you brought up Shadow Shaper.
Yeah.
So Sierra, so has anyone read Shadow Shaper, by the way? If you haven't, you should. It's amazing.
Thank you.
But Daniel's protagonist is this incredible Afro-Latina. And my question is, why a woman? I'm happy. We all are. But I'm always fascinated. You know what I mean? We all, seriously, like we could use,
right.
Lord knows we could use more women than everything.
Absolutely.
We also about the erasure of women, right? And so my question to you is, why did you land on like, did it scare you at all? Was it hard to sort of craft it? I mean, I'm sure it wasn't, but let me ask you. I don't know. We had the discussion all the time in the industry. There's always talk about like, are you going to write a? People always ask me. I'll say that. People always ask me, are you going to write a female protagonist? And of course, I'm like, yeah, of course. I'd love to, and I am. The next track book is all about.
Oh, good.
It's all. The whole book is all girls. Like all girls school, all girls in family, all girls. It's all girls. But why? I want to know what was your thought process?
And I would add to that why an Afro
Or why not, for that matter?
why an Afro Latino too, being
Why
a
an
Black
Afro-Latino?
Latino. Because those were on my mind, and at the same time, when I started writing Shadow Shaper in 2009. I was 29. It was the first thing long form that I had ever written and was gonna write. So one beginner mistake that I made was to throw every single monster I had ever come up with over the course of my life into it. So the first draft just has like hundreds of different monster communities all over Brooklyn that are invisible to everyone except Sierra.
Can you give a quick? Because they have read it.
For Shadow Shaper?
So Shadow Shaper.
Shadow Shaper is basically about Sierra Santiago, who's a 16-year-old girl in Brooklyn who's a muralist who finds out that she's part of this spiritual legacy called shadow shaping, wherein she can bring her murals to life with spirits. So she's basically the conduit between the spirit and the art. And then it turns out this insane Colombian anthropologist is trying to kill all the shadow shapers and take over the world, and she has to stop them, basically. So that's Shadow Shaper.
Afro-Latina superhero.
Afro-Latina superhero. You know, what happened was I was loving Harry Potter, and I was also finding like a distinct absence in Harry Potter, like we all kind of did if we're not Harry Potter. You know, same like...
Which none of us are.
Right, but yeah, well, demographically speaking. Same like Michael saves the world type motif over and over. And I was like, I would love to love these books even more, you know, if they were to not only like show us in them, but also say something deep about our existence. And you know, JK can't really do that, and we know that now. But I also feel like, you know, that needs to happen. Like, we need to have our own, not just stories about our struggle, but stories about magic and our struggle, and stories about everyday life and all these other things. So it was really like, that was the framework where I was coming from, was a counter-narrative. Trying to tell a really cool, deep story about magic and the real world, and do it from a way that's not just like painting a brown face on a white character and being like good, but actually trying to get into the rhythms and the different structures that we bring to things, you know, the different narrative ideas that we bring to things and settings. So I asked the empty page, you know, like, who's going to step up? And Sierra Santiago showed up like without question. She elbowed everybody else out of the way, and she was like, "I'm here. What's up?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, you know, all right." Now, mind you, at the time, like the prospect of just writing a book was so gigantic to me that all the other things within that were impossible challenges just seemed like part of the swirl. So I don't think I was fully conscious of like, okay, now I have to really, you know, in some ways. But in other ways, I was like, okay, this is a character who is not me on a certain number of levels, and let me make sure, first and foremost, that I'm not trying to protect myself in the way that I write her. Because I think that's a lot of the mistake that we make when we're writing from privilege, is to kind of like figure out a way to get out of our privilege in vis-a-vis that character, right? So like, you know, a man writing a woman will have a man come in and save the day at the end of the story, or just no directions without having to ask. And whatever bullshit we make up about ourselves that we want to believe is true, you know, we'll figure a way to make that happen in the story. And so it was a matter of checking myself. And then part of the reason that she's Afro-Latina is that over the course of the book, I kind of realized that if I left her the sort of ambiguous Latino that I had in my head when I first started writing her, she would immediately be coded to look like me. Because that's what happens in the publishing industry. The cover would have been a white-looking, white-passing Latina. You know, her hair would have been curly and down. I don't have hair, but you know. And that's the default for Latinos. And I also knew that if I did make her Afro-Latina, but I also gave the community around her a pass, and didn't make them deal with the anti-blackness that exists in Latino communities, I could totally get away with that. Partially because of who I am and how I look. And I know that people will be reading this book and thinking they understand the Latino community based on this book in some ways. Folks who don't know any Latinos, but will be like, I read Shadow Shaper, and everybody was cool in that. It was a big happy melting pot. And that's a lie. So that was another lie that I didn't want to perpetrate in this book. And that's why, you know, Tia Rosa comes in with all of her bigoted bullshit and anti-blackness. That's why Sierra's, you know, dating a Haitian and all the things that fall out of that. And so it was really just a question of like checking myself and checking the different ways that I would have been able to hide who I was in terms of my privilege within the story, and trying to be as honest and raw as possible with that. So you know, I came from a back. And it was good work, and it's work of the soul, and it's work of like intellectual work too. And I think that's where it's challenging, because we want to, in these conversations, it's always like, do your homework, you'll be good. You know what I mean? Like, there's no homework, there's no book that you can just read that's gonna be like, here are the facts of Afro-Latino identity. Here's what it means to be a girl in Brooklyn. You know, you can read like Jackie's book and like find out a lot of stuff, but that's not homework that's of the mind, it's homework that's of the heart. and there's homework that means you have to check yourself and shut the fuck up sometimes and listen, which we're not trying to do either as men or I think as writers.
Yeah. I agree.
So where are you at with this book? With the sequel, I mean.
So the sequel is about a young woman named Patina. The young woman named Patina. And Patina has, her mother has diabetes and has had both of her legs amputated and has sent her to go and live, she's given custody to her father, who's a good man, but is married, newly married to a white woman. They live on the other side of the neighborhood where there are more numbers in the address, or less numbers for that matter. I don't know if you guys ever been to Roland Park in Baltimore. Have anybody been in the Roland Park area in Baltimore? So you've been at the Roland Park. So Roland Park, it's like 10 miles, 5 miles, 2 miles outside of the hood, right, in Baltimore. But it's a lot of money up there. When you ride down Roland Park Boulevard or Roland Park Avenue, Roland Park Street, Lane, whatever one it is, where all the houses are, the addresses, it's like 6 Roland Park, 7 Roland Park, right? And so this young lady now lives in one of those houses. Like she came from like 67823, 14th Street to 6 Roland Park, right? And she has a white mother, and this white mother is now raising her and her younger sister. And so there's all the politics about like, look, I'm gonna take care of mine, right? I know you're my new stepmom, and I got love for you, but you can't take care of my little sister. I got her, right? And so it's this responsibility to like, don't try to do her head because you don't really know how to take care of what we got going on. I'm gonna handle it. Don't worry. It's all love, but I'm gonna handle it, right? And so there are all these kinds of things. Now, when it came to writing the character, I think the funniest thing about a man writing a young woman is that the first thing that you have to tell yourself or remind yourself, which is the problem in and of itself,
right,
but you have to remind yourself that this person is a person.
Right.
Right? So everyone's always like, yo, how do you write girls? Oh, well, first thing I do is I remind myself that girls are also human beings. Right? And so, right? And so there are more similarities than differences. I mean, it's so funny how we try to figure out what are the nuances, and oftentimes trying to find those nuances create caricatures of what it means to be a girl in America or a girl in the world in general. Right. We create these caricatures by othering them, right? And so for me, what I wanted to do is I wanted to write all the girls I grew up with. Because the girls I grew up with, right? The girls I grew up with, I always say this in all my talks, the girls I grew up with, which is why you hear the Queen Latifah references, they were Queen Latifah. The kind of girls where it was like, look, I know you wear that flower lotion that everybody wearing, and I like it, right? I like it, you know what I mean? You got the flower lotion on. But I also know that at any given time, you might bust somebody in the face. Right? That you can defend yourself, you want to defend the whole, you want to defend everybody in the neighborhood. Right?
Yes.
And you smell like the flower lotion.
Yes.
Right? There's this balance.
Yes.
There's balance.
Yes.
And so that's who Patty is. And that's who Love is in Boy in the Black Suit. That's who Jazz and Tasha are when I was the greatest. Yes. That's who Barry is in All American Boys. Right. That's who Tess is in As Brave as You. Right? Like those are the girls that I'm writing on. We always see the strange thin sliced girl where it's like, oh, she's the captain of the cheerleading team, or she's the quote unquote ugly duckling, right? It's this weird polarization, this dichotomy and binary about what a girl can be. But really it's like most young girls that I know are on like fit in the middle of the spectrum where all the other boys fit too, right?
Right.
Where you're just a person trying to navigate.
Lots of interests.
With lots of interests and lots of fears and all the things.
That's exactly what gets me about this whole question. So often we, in general, folks who don't get to write ourselves so often show up on the page as these singular entities, just like you're talking about. Like, there's the Jack. That's the black dude. Oh, okay, what the fuck else is he? You know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, we are and we are also. And we are also. Which was that's beautiful.
Right? Yeah. People were like, yo, why did you write a track book? And the honest answer is because I didn't want to write a basketball book. Like that's the truth, right? I didn't want to do it.
That's a good reason.
It's the truth, though. They were like, yo, you should just do it. I'm like, yo, Kwame got it. We good. Right? Kwame, he got basketball covered. But the truth is that like young kids of color do a lot more to play basketball. It's the same reason that Rashad Butler is not a basketball player either. Right. All American Boys.
He's an ROTC kid.
He's an artist and he's ROTC.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think these are the things. It's like what's his name? Rockwell. Yeah.
Norman Rockwell. Yeah.
Norman Rockwell, right? But the genius of Norman Rockwell was that he was just showing like these sort of snapshots of America, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, here's the barbershop, or here's the girl eating an ice cream cone. I think there's something really powerful about a young black girl, like just holding her sister's hand, right? A young black girl just walking to school, a young black girl eating ice cream.
Yeah, and it's those moments, right? That's see. I think we really are the same person. It's like in our creative process, because it will be these moments, and I'll never forget with Midnight Taxi Tango is a book in my adult series, The Bullshit Roomba, and I was standing outside of a hospital one day on my lunch break when I was a paramedic, and this livery cab just pulls up, or in New York we call them gypsy cabs, pulls up, and inside there's this really dapper woman in her 60s with like salt and pepper hair, like greased back, she's wearing a vest, she's got fingerless leather gloves, and they're on the steering wheel, and she just stops right in front of me, takes out a cigarette, puts it in her mouth, lights it, sits there smoking for a second, and then drives off. And I was like, Jesus Christ. I'm gonna write a book about that lady. And I did. I motherfucking did, because she was like, and that's all it took. And I was like, I stored her in the file cabinet that every writer has. Right. And then I needed one other thing to make her come to life. And it turned out that was in a file cabinet that I had ordered back when I was literally 18 or something, and working at a diner outside of Harvard Square. And it was me and a whole bunch of super annoying all-American kids, and then this really butch lesbian chick with punk rock hair and a nose ring, and her and I were like, let's hang out, we are cool, because no one else liked us. So we would hang out outside all the time, and her other job besides being a waitress was, she basically was the bodyguard for sex workers. So she would drive them to their gigs and the John and whatever, and then she would make sure nothing went down. So I remember being 19 and her telling me about this and thinking like, I'm gonna write a book about you one day. And it took about 15 years or whatever until, and then it was like, boom. And those two things like came together, which kind of speaks to this whole thing. I don't know if you read Stephen King's On Writing.
I have.
It's so
It's
great.
brilliant.
It's so brilliant.
Rather in a review I write,
Yeah, read that book.
it's so good.
But when he talks about this idea that like a story is just like thing A and thing B and putting them together, that shit is so deceptively simple, because I always think about it. And you know when you read a story that's just a thing A, and you're reading it and you're like, this is thing A, thing A.
It's still on thing A, right?
It's 90 pages in and there's no B. Like you can feel it. So there's no tension, there's nothing interesting, nothing is in conversation with anything else. It's just A.
It's like my first novel.
No!
Not the one you guys know, the one that nobody will ever see. It's called Boom. I was reading it the other day.
It's called Boom?
It's called Boom.
With an exclamation point?
With an exclamation.
Funny enough, I want to read that shit. That sounds good.
And I turned it in. This is God. I was 23, I think. 24. I turned it in. It took a year for my agent to say anything. And my agent at the time.
That's when you know something's
Which my
wrong.
agent is no longer my agent at the time. And when she finally reached out to me, and I went to her, like, no, before you answer, I want to come to the office. I want to talk to you about this face to face.
You wanted to receive your ether in
I
person.
needed to get it in person. Because they can't, they're a little more sensitive when you in their face, right? So I go to the office, and she's like, hey Jason, here's the thing. I read it twice. And I'm like, it took you a year to read it twice. And I read it like 300 pages, I read it twice.
Oh Lord.
The writing is strong. And I was like, oh yeah. So I'm like, all right, we're almost there, right? The writing is strong. She's like, you know, nothing happens. It's like nothing happens in the whole book. Like nothing happens. And I was like, you just don't understand my brilliance. Like, what you really mean is you're not equipped to represent me. True. Fine. No one will ever read that book, unfortunately. It's in my mom's house.
I want you to know that's literally the exact same comment that I got in my first book that no one's ever going to read.
See?
That's literally the same.
So all you writers out there who write book number 1, nothing is going to happen.
Right. Or put it another way.
Start number 2 now.
Or just make some shit happen.
Or just make something happen.
Because American literature already has enough goddamn books where nothing happens in it.
And they all win awards.
That's hilarious though. So, this is what I wanted to ask you. Well, first I want to ask you, was there a moment where you realized that shit has to happen?
What's the mind? So look, here's this.
Oh, that's where I was going to go next.
Yeah.
Wait, actually, let me rephrase this. When I was reading Ghost, which is an amazing book, by the way, read Ghost, so beautiful. I love that it's getting the attention that it's getting because it's gorgeous. I don't know if you did this on purpose, but first of all, I noticed you name dropped Chris Myers and name the characters. Chris Myers is the shit. That's Walter D. Myers' son, and maybe because of that, but I had in mind that there was something of a reflection in Ghost's relationship to Coach and your relationship to Walter. And I might have totally made that up, but it brought me a lot of comfort while I was reading it. So did I make that up?
You made it up, but
That's cool.
But I also don't ever dismiss that which is subconscious.
Yeah.
I think we're always operating. Everything is open, right? It's like we come to the table, and I always say this to my students. When you sit at the computer or you sit at the notepad, you bring all your selves to the page, right? So all of your selves are with you every time you show up to write every day. The part of you that is insecure, the part of you that is damaged and traumatized, the part of you that is joyous and excited, the part of you that is still 6 years old, right? All of those parts of you are with you every day at the page, right? And so it doesn't, so like if that's what you got from it, if you could see that they made, especially knowing what you know about me, if you could see the through line, or that there could be some sort of nod to Walter and the relationship between me and Coach, it's probably because subconsciously it's right? And I don't ever want to dismiss that. I think that's what happens sometimes.
Definitely.
But I will say this about Walter. I mean, does everybody know? Okay, I want to make sure.
We're talking about Walter D. Myers.
The late great juggernaut that is and was Walter D. Myers.
Our collective godfather.
Our collective godfather. I wouldn't be here. Like, I wouldn't. These books wouldn't exist. My career wouldn't exist if it weren't for the 35 years of work, 40 years of work that we put in to write these stories.
And I would just say that Jackie Woodson is really the collective fairy godmother of all of us too. So, but yeah,
that's the truth. But one thing Walter said, one thing Chris always told me about Walter, he said that when Walter didn't start until much later in his life. He was actually working in a retail store all through most of his 30s.
Wow.
As I was before I got on. And he said that Walter he lost his job. His wife said, look man, you can go and find another job or you can just take this writing thing seriously. Right? Way to go to Mrs. Myers. And Walter said, okay, I'm going to try to go full time. And Walter every day would read what he had written to his family. So Chris would have to sit on the couch when he's like 7 or 8, and his wife would sit there and they would listen to Walter read whatever he had written for the day. And usually, at the end of it, Chris would be like, I love it, Dad, right? I love it, And his mother would say, nah, like, and she would say, you think that everybody cares about all this stuff. When really what people want is for you to move the story forward, right? Like you're spending all this time like pontificating, which is all just what we now know, what editors would call authorial, right? It's really just a big jack off of a writer. Right? That writers oftentimes are very masturbatory and arrogant and pompous, and they spend a lot of time on the page trying to prove to the reader that they're the author. When a good writer knows, a good author will convince the reader that it's not being written by an actual person, but instead they're listening to the voice of the person who is the protagonist that's speaking. Right? Like that's the point. It's supposed to feel easy.
Yeah.
A hard-written book is the book that is easy to read. And so I remember that story. And so when it comes to a book like Ghost, that's all I'm ever thinking about. Is like, all right, I could take 3 or 4 pages to really get into the psyche of Ghost, or I could take 2 paragraphs and do the same work.
Yeah.
Right, which is a lot harder to do.
Yeah.
And move the story forward.
And make us know it's by the actions of the page.
It's about what's happening on the page.
Victor LaValle says the writer's job is not to give the why.
Exactly.
And that single simple sentence has haunted me, I swear to God, because I catch myself doing that too. And I think you nailed it when you said that it's like us trying to prove ourselves sometimes. And I was telling my students literally the other day that when we overwrite, it's really a function, I think, of a lack of confidence and our lack of trust in the reader. Right? It's either that I don't think I'm writer enough to give you what you need with a few quick strokes, or I don't think you're reader enough to pick it up. Either way, the reader's offended because I'm like, I don't like being talked down to.
I'm talking to Jackie about it.
Yeah.
Right? So you gotta read another Brooklyn?
Read another Brooklyn if you have. That's gorgeous.
Tell you, why not come here tonight? It's so weird. Like, I don't even know your homework. Like, next time you come, here's the books you need to have read.
Stop telling me what to read.
No. Another Brooklyn? This is the order. Like, you need to read it. I think everyone should read it. And it's nominated for National Book Award, and who read it, right? But what Jackie told me about Another Brooklyn, which is all written in these really short vignettes, right? It's like every page has like 4 different little parts on it. And I asked her about it. The whole book, it spans 20 years.
In like 100 pages.
And it's like 20,000 words.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And it's 20 years of a life, right? It's amazing. And I asked her about it, and she said, you know, Jason, when you're writing a book like this, the one thing that most authors have a hard time doing is trusting the reader.
Right.
The white space allows for the reader to do some work.
Right.
To do some work.
Yes.
And I think,
yes, we like to work.
of course. Yes. Of course.
Yeah.
And I think, you know what? I liken it to like Quest. Everybody knows Quest. We're going to do some pop culture references. Does everyone know who Questlove is?
Yes.
Thank the Lord. All right. So Questlove, right? If you ever watch Questlove, if you ever hear people who are music aficionados, they'll say that like, yeah, you know, if you look at some of the more fancy, like the rock and roll drummers and how they can do all the tricks, they can like, it's all solo work, right? And then like, but Questlove has ascended to like one of the best drummers in history, and the question is why? And the answer is because restraint. Because he can restrain himself and play the simplest rhythm for like 3 hours without missing a beat. That is mastery.
Right. And you know exactly what he's saying.
That's mastery.
Based on what he doesn't say. I was thinking of the caricaturist Hirschfield, Al Hirschfield, you know, who did these famous theatrical caricatures for the New Yorker and I think the New York Magazine for a long time. And he would do like this entire person whose humanity you would instantly recognize with like 6 lines. And you look at it and you're like, what? That is that person. And it's so beautiful, and it so speaks to that person's soul in a way that, you know, someone else drawing 1,000 lines could never get close to. And I think of him when I edit, you know, because there's this expression in my spiritual system where we say, what Oya destroys, you don't need. And it's like, the more that you can chop that shit out of there, and it's still intact, and in fact, it's much stronger because of what you've taken out. There's just a power to that. I feel like I learned to write almost first and foremost because I would come home off the ambulance and just blow out the shit that had gone down the night before. And it would take me like 20 minutes. And I would just write this quick, ridiculous little story that was all true, exactly what happened, throw in some medical facts and trivia, and people were like, man, this is good shit. And I was like, you know, if I just made some shit up, it would be fiction. And it was so big because it was so simple, but it totally broke through all of the ways that I was overthinking writing, which was stopping me from writing. Because I was thinking, like, when I write my book, it's gonna be a great fucking novel. Instead of like, just tell a fucking story, which is actually what every writer's motto should be, because that's your one and only job, is to tell a fucking story.
So for all you people who work with kids, who are afraid to write, this is what happens. Kids are educated out of writing. Kids are educated out of it, right? It becomes really daunting for them because everyone is telling them, like I tell people, like, look, if your kid is speaking what you all call improper English and what I call different English, which is what you should call it too, because improper means that it's wrong. And you're telling kids that their natural voice is wrong.
Right.
You can't expect them to then grow up and be stereotypes.
Right. And if they're, do you keep a journal?
I don't. I should have.
Yeah, I just, for me, like, having, it's on and off, like, since I was 16. And I know that having the blank page be a place that I would go to for solace completely transformed how I think of writing today. You know, because I talk to all these writers who just hate writing and they're terrified of the blank page and they bring so much anxiety to it, which I understand too because it is really intense. But I know that having gone there and sought help there, like when in my most difficult hours, knowing that blank page would bring some kind of healing, even if I couldn't make sense of the situation, if I could sit down and just, you know, so when I sit down, I'm sitting down with an old friend, and I'm like, what are we going to do today? Instead of like, what the fuck you going to write? What's next? You know you're on deadline, right? Sharon's waiting for your notes. Like, and that's not healthy, you know? That's not exactly what I said.
That's real. All right, I want to ask, I want to shift gears for a second. This is going to be a loaded question.
Diversity? We got something diversity?
In the back doorway.
All right.
Here's my question. Right now in our industry, specifically in our category, there are a handful of us. But there are actually a little more than a handful of us. I think next year we're going to see quite a lot going on. I'm really excited about it. Next 2 years are going to be really incredible when it comes to diversity.
We're doing the thing.
My question is, what do you see while there's this interesting pool right now? What if any? But what do you see? Like, what do you feel like your role is? And this is loaded, but I'm interested to know. This is what I mean. Like, you can of course be like, nah, I can't.
I would never say that to you, Jason. My role.
Because you do have a very specific.
I do.
And we all know it. All of us know it. All of them know it, right? People know, like.
Only if they follow me on Twitter.
If they follow you on Twitter. They all know.
I I came in knowing my role from jump, right? Because I was an organizer and activist before I was a writer, and I was kind of a writer before I was an organizer and activist. But to me, having come from an activist background, it's almost like, how could I ever have a platform and not use it to speak some truth? So it was never a question, it was always a strategy more than anything to be like, all right, sometimes it was like, how do I need to like shut up so I can get to a certain place and then talk out? But it turned out that talking out was actually just how I move through the world naturally. So it's not even like that much of a choice. It's just kind of like, well, I'm pissed off about something, and I'm not gonna let it just sit here, and I'm not gonna just call someone about it. I need to put it out there. Because of also that activist background, the analysis is all right there in the forefront of my brain. So it's really just a question of fitting the pieces together for whatever dumb situation is going on and calling it what I see it as. So I think it's like, how do you move through the world as a writer and a storyteller with that in mind? Because I think the default assumption around this is like, well, you're going to be didactic because you have so many strong feelings about shit, so you're just going to tell everybody what you think. But I think there's a trash and lazy analysis of what the truth is, which is that if you are strategic about all that passion that you have, no matter what it's about, you're always going to be entering the page in a strategic way and thinking about how you bring it to the page, how you bring it to the character, to the world building. What I always think of is like, we were talking about world building. World building is like harmony, right? And story is melody. So there's a lot of room in that harmony, in all those stacked notes, for us to talk about what's really going on in the world and still tell a great story and still have magic and adventures and people falling in love and everything else. We don't have to do it at the cost of anything. But I think we're taught that we do. So I think if anything, my role in this, in this community and this time right now is to tell the truth, tell great stories, and let people know that you can do both at the same time, even when those are difficult truths that people want to shy away from. And if people read my work and they're like, oh shit, I didn't realize we could trash white supremacy in a fantasy book. I would now do that too. And I'm like, yo, that's fucking beautiful. I did my job. You know what I'm saying? We can talk about patriarchy and masculinity and the problems with it and the toxicity of it, and we can still talk about dragons. Those aren't, one is not off the table because we talked about the other. And the more I have people come to me and be like, I really just didn't think that was even a possible thing to do and get published, the more I feel like that's my mission accomplished, because I also didn't think you could do that and get published. I figured I was going to have to chop Shadow Shaper up into little pieces to get what I needed to say across. Come to find out I didn't. And, thank you, Scholastic, for being open, and Cheryl, my editor, for being so dope and so open to really getting that message out. But yeah, that's where I'm at. What about you?
Man, I think that's a really amazing answer. At least for me, I don't know how y'all feel, but that's for me, and I guess this will be the last moment that we have to take a question, right? I know we're about that time. Yeah. You see how the old brain be ticking, right? That's how you do these things often. You know what, man? I'll tell you, in terms of role, I spend a lot of time with young people. A lot of time. And so the first part of, at this particular stage in my career, one of the biggest parts, one of my biggest sort of pieces of this role has to do with my body, my personhood. Because I think what we underestimate and what I am face to face with every single day is that there are young people all over America who don't know that a writer can look like them, can look just like them, right? Can look like their older brothers with tattoos and sneakers and long hair and all of the things that they think can't happen because everybody is telling them that we're still living in a world where people say, look, if you look a certain way, you can't get a certain thing. And so I show up to these schools, or I show up to these prisons, or I show up to halfway houses or any other space that's predominantly dominated by young people, whether they're black or other. And there's always this sort of look of surprise, this look of shock, because everyone is like, and there are always kids who are like, yo, I really don't even gonna look like that. I didn't think like that. I'm like, I don't even know what I thought you was gonna look like, but I didn't think you were gonna look like that. Why do you want to talk like that? Right? Because I make it very clear. I do my best. We all know how to code switch, right? We all got all our brown people in America got a million languages. I know how to speak all the languages, right? But I'm cognizant of the fact that when I'm in front of a bunch of young people, I make sure that I speak the familiar language, our familiar language, in our familial language, because I need them to know that that's okay too, that you can be who you are in all the spaces, right? And then after both of those things, there comes these stories where they then can sit with that and hold that and save it and savor it and use it as sort of an example. I tell them all the time, one day you'll be 30 and you'll be able to say, yo, if you want to know what it was like to be a 16-year-old growing up in Brooklyn in 2016, here's All American Boys. This is America in 2016-14. Right? This is they talk like me, and they walk like me, and they dress like me, and they joke like me, and we really underestimate. And the dude who wrote it is just like me.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that more than anything, and I think for me, and I love the books, and I'm grateful for the books, and I will continue to write their stories and give them authenticity and balance and integrity and show them in the light that they deserve to be shown. And I think we are really dismissive of our young people and expect them to grow up and be great as if we actually care for them. You know what I mean? We pretend to care, we passively care.
Right.
But we don't want to care for them when it gets ugly.
Right.
We don't want to ask them what's wrong when they're in the street fighting. We want to look the other way and be afraid. How do you be afraid of your kids? Your kids out there, right? So first I need to let them know that I love them, which I always do. Janet, I tell them I love them. I tell them they're brilliant. And then I show them that in the book. Right? And they get to see it from a guy that in any other space is just as feared as they are. Like, that's my role today. That's my role today, and I'm grateful for it, for sure. All right. Before we have a few people who are doing this work, but Shadow Shaper specifically because it's grounded in reality. So I had this theory. You guys know John Corey Whaley? John Corey Whaley wrote a book called Noggin. He wrote Where Things Come Back. He wrote Highly Logical Behavior. Good friend of mine. When Noggin is a book about a kid who has his head chopped off and then reattached, cryogenics, right? But it's all based in reality. And I said one time to another writer friend of ours, I said, man, it's a really interesting sort of tale, and he does a pretty good job at like really grounding this thing, which is really hard to do. Too bad I couldn't have written it and it be published. Too bad that I couldn't have written a black character who has his head chopped off and reattached and it be taken seriously. So the reason that a book like Shadow Shaper is a big deal, right, is because one day we're going to be able to be like, yeah, and now there's this black kid, he goes to the moon, these stories can exist and be seen as plausible in a way that they weren't, let alone 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And so I'm also excited to see, because I love these books, but the reason I write so many of these books that are realistic is because I'm still trying to convince the world that our kids are human beings. After that, then we can go to space, right? But I got to convince people that they're here first, right? And I'm excited for that work to be done so that we can go to space, or we can go to other planets and they be regular black kids in Jordans on another planet just doing this thing, right? Like my kids actually not, and so I'm excited to see where we go with that.
Thank you.